Today we're going to discuss the role of resveratrol in chronic disease. And so you may be saying, well, why do you have a slide up with the role of the chiropractor in the obesity pandemic? And the answer is this is a continuing education seminar that I gave at Life University in Atlanta, Georgia in 2014 to chiropractors who need to renew their licenses. But we won't be talking about obesity so much, but there are slides in this presentation that I want to use for my resveratrol talk today, and I didn't feel like making a new PowerPoint. So let's be efficient, right? So we're going to use this PowerPoint for some of it, and then we'll go to more updated research from here. So let's dive in, and we'll go to, all right. So we'll start here. And what we want to understand is chronic disease, whether we're talking about cancer, heart disease, lung disease, COVID, autoimmunity, diabetes, whatever becomes chronic for us and kills us slowly. And most of the acute things too are acute bouts of inflammation, but chronic disease fundamentally is inflammation. And then the inflammation, depending on the individual and their exposome and their epigenome and their microbiome, the multiple different factors in their health, the different puzzle for each person determines, does the inflammation become neurologic disease, or does it become heart disease, or does it become cancer or autoimmunity? And so science has known this for a long time. This is the Time article in 2004 that talked about inflammation as the secret killer. And just saying that what I just said, basically the lowest common denominator or the underlying thread in chronic disease is inflammation. And so if we are practicing functional medicine shines in chronic disease care, not in acute disease care. You know, conventional medicine shines in acute disease care, but not chronic disease care. And so they're great at broken arms, and if you get shot and stabbed and different acute injuries, but they're not good at cancer. But they own cancer, so they're the best at cancer because they own cancer, but they're not good at cancer. They've been fighting the war, so to speak, for 50 years, and somehow we still don't have a cure. They're not good at diabetes. They're not good at heart disease, right? These numbers aren't decreasing with time. More people are dying of these things with time. So chronic disease care is where functional medicine shines, and chronic disease is where lifestyle and environment shines, because lifestyle, environment, choices, those are the things that are determining whether or not you are expressing genes that lead to these different diseases. And we've talked about that in previous videos, and we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. So before we understand resveratrol's role in chronic disease, we have to understand inflammation and how it happens so that we can understand how resveratrol addresses it. So this is a picture from a journal, the New England Journal of Medicine, a ways back. And this is just the cellular mechanism of how inflammation happens. And so you don't have to obviously memorize this or even know this, but I want you to just have seen it because we've talked about some of this in previous videos. So what I want you to see here is NFKappa B, okay, that stands for nuclear factor kappa beta. NFKappa B, amplifying loop of chronic inflammation. So an amplifying loop is a circle, a loop, right? So you have an input, which are inflammatory signals, pro-inflammatory cytokines, right? So you've heard of cytokine storm. That's just a storm of inflammatory chemicals. Well, you can have pro-inflammatory cytokines that are present that aren't causing a cytokine storm, and it's much more common, obviously, for people not to have cytokine storms because no one had heard of them that wasn't a doctor or a scientist until 2020. So viruses can drive inflammation, oxidative stress, so toxins and heavy metals and too much sun exposure and different things can drive oxidation. Those inputs trigger inside your cells the production of NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B enters the nucleus of your cell, and at the genetic level triggers coding for the production of pro-inflammatory proteins that that then go out into your body and lead to inflammation. And you'll notice two of the very common ones are actually the three. One isn't listed here, but the NF-kappa B will make TNF-alpha, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin-1 beta. We've talked about these before in a chronic inflammation video when we were talking about genetics, right? And we've looked at, hey, you might have a genetic variant that makes you more susceptible to creating more TNF-alpha or more interleukin-6, more C-reactive protein, so you're more inflamed. So here's the danger. In chronic disease, if you're chronically inflamed, this becomes a self-amplifying loop, as you see here. So you can start it with something from the outside, right? Like a virus or oxidative stress or toxin or something, but then it can be perpetuated in a loop fashion. So we remove the virus, say, or we remove the toxic exposure, but we may be in a self-amplifying loop at that point of chronic inflammation. So we need strategies to suppress the inflammation. We need to get rid of the trigger, but then if the inflammation stays after the trigger is gone, how do we suppress that inflammation? So things that will suppress NF-kappa B and TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, interleukin-1 beta, these things can be clinically strategic for us. So what are triggers for NF-kappa B? Here's a list of them from the same study. A couple of them that you've heard of. So the cytokines, we just talked about that, and we've talked about that in previous videos. Hydrogen peroxide or oxidants like ozone, okay? Different oxidation products there. Viruses, look at these, very common viruses. All of these are common. Rhinovirus, flu virus, Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, adenovirus. So Epstein-Barr and cytomegalovirus are herpes family viruses. They're everywhere, right? If we tested the planet, up to 95% of people would show history of these viruses. Well, if your immune system isn't keeping them dormant, they may reactivate and drive NF-kappa B, and we're off to that inflammatory loop race. Phytohemagglutinin, or PHA. This is a big stimulator of NF-kappa B. Where do we get it? Well, from the diet, the most common source of PHA, or the largest source of PHA in the diet, I should say, are kidney beans. So if you love your beans, especially kidney beans, and you're chronically inflamed and you can't understand why, because you eat quote unquote healthy, right? Well, maybe that quote unquote healthy kidney bean is unhealthy in your case because it's a massive NF-kappa B driver. Lipopolysaccharide, LPS, or endotoxin. This is produced by gram-negative bacteria. Gram-negative bacteria in the gut. Here's how the gut, one reason why the gut could be a big time inflammatory trigger if you're overloaded with gram-negatives like H. pylori or Klebsiella or Citrobacter or Pseudomonas, or bacteria like that. Ultraviolet radiation can drive NF-kappa B, so inappropriate sun exposure. Again, these cytokines, nitric oxide synthase, the COX pathways, so omega-6 fatty acids, drive inflammation. They're pro-inflammatory. So lots of inputs. More maybe recognizable to the layperson, stress will drive NF-kappa B. Diet through various mechanisms, chemotherapy, radiation, infection, obesity, addiction, all of these things can drive NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B then promotes production of the interleukins and TNF-alpha, et cetera, and those things lead to tissue damage and symptoms. So this is NF-kappa B, and NF-kappa B plays a role in the fundamental inflammatory process that drives chronic disease, and that's included in autoimmunity. So this paper was saying that NF-kappa B signaling needs to be tightly downregulated for the maintenance of tissue homeostasis. Okay, we need NF-kappa B to mount an inflammatory response and clean a wound or kill an infection, but when it's inappropriate, if it becomes a perpetuating loop and we can't downregulate it, then we lose homeostasis and we become diseased. So we want to downregulate NF-kappa B to prevent inflammation, prevent autoimmunity, prevent tumor formation. Recent data have shown that NF-kappa B is required for activation of autoreactive T cells, and its hyperactivity ultimately contributes to initiation of type 1 diabetes. So NF-kappa B that is out of hand is required to activate autoimmune T cells. So if we can keep NF-kappa B at bay, we can prevent autoimmunity. And an increasing number of studies indicate that NF-kappa B plays an important role in controlling expression of genes relevant to the pathogenesis of autoimmunity. So translated, that says NF-kappa B is an epigenetic input in autoimmunity. So NF-kappa B controls expression of genes. That is an epigenetic input. So a gene is there. Is it expressed or not expressed? Depends on environmental factors. One factor would be NF-kappa B. And one level back from that is, what is the factor driving the NF-kappa B, right? The stress, the diet, the et cetera, et cetera. NF-kappa B is a key signaling component in autoimmunity. So if you didn't get it by this slide, there's a repeated statement. Okay, so from an autoimmune perspective, that's why we want to squash NF-kappa B. From chronic disease perspective, we want to keep NF-kappa B tightly regulated. So how do we do that? Many ways, but the focus of today's talk is resveratrol. So we're going to jump down to resveratrol here. And so here's a study looking at resveratrol in autoimmune disease and its role in helping prevent autoimmune disease by regulating Th17 cells. If you've read my book, The Autoimmune Answer, it's on Amazon if you haven't. I discuss Th17 cells and their role in promoting the tissue damage seen in autoimmune disease. So if you get Th17 dominant immunologically, you're increasing risk of autoimmune disease. Well, this study is showing that resveratrol is a potent anti-inflammatory compound, and it increases the activity of T regulatory cells. T regulatory cells are the conductor of the symphony, so to speak. They are promoting immune balance. They promote tolerance, so you don't attack yourself, or you don't respond to foods inappropriately, or you can walk through the Macy's perfume aisle without getting a headache, right? They promote tolerance in an anti-inflammatory environment. So we like T regulatory cells to promote balance and homeostasis and health. Resveratrol helps promote them. This study looked at resveratrol with autoimmune heart disease. So resveratrol significantly decreased cellular infiltration, fibrosis, and expression of inflammatory cytokines in the heart tissue. Resveratrol significantly ameliorated myocardial injury and preserved cardiac function in a rat model. So how does it do it? One way is by decreasing the NF-kappa B in the pro-inflammatory outputs. Resveratrol may be therapeutic target against obesity-related inflammation and gut dysfunction. That's a study from 2011. Another one, resveratrol is capable of inhibiting lipogenesis or fat creation. So there's a therapeutic role for resveratrol in the treatment or prevention of obesity. Again, obesity is a chronic inflammatory disease. The fat tissue, the adipose in obesity, can act as an endocrine organ and pump out cytokines that promote inflammation. Here's a study that confirms NF-kappa B inhibition and anti-inflammatory activity of resveratrol. So this is just one of many, but resveratrol directly inhibits NF-kappa B. So if we want to stop inflammatory disease, why not start at the source, right? At the cellular level. So resveratrol is key for that, if that's one of our goals. Now we want to jump over to more recent research here. So before we do that, here's a study that's from 2010. And, you know, pharmaceutical companies aren't blind to this stuff. This study is entitled Design, Synthesis, and Biologic Evaluation of Resveratrol Analogs as aromatase and quinone reductase 2 inhibitors for chemoprevention of cancer. Big mouthful, but what I want you to take from that is they're studying analogs to resveratrol, or basically lab-made copies or pharmaceutical versions of resveratrol as strategies for blocking enzymes that can promote cancer production. Okay, why not just use resveratrol? Well, they can't financially benefit from resveratrol because it's a natural product and you can't patent a natural product. So one motivation is if you can change it and make it man-made, like a lab version of it, then that is patentable, and now you have a blockbuster drug, so to speak. So you can financially benefit from that. Another reason they might want to try and make pharmaceutical analogs is that sometimes because resveratrol is a natural product, it's not going to necessarily be as potent as at stopping a specific pathway as a lab created version would be. We've talked before that medications or drugs can stop up to 90% of a given pathway, a given physiologic pathway, and that's why they can be effective more quickly, but that's also why they have a longer side effect profile or risk profile, because they're almost completely cutting off a needed physiologic pathway. Whereas resveratrol or curcumin or vitamin D or other natural products you use, they may impact the same pathway, but they also have oftentimes what are called pluripotent effects, meaning they affect a bunch of different pathways. So they might only shut down the pathway you want to modulate by 65%. So it'll take longer to get the effect you want, but you'll have a lower side effect risk. So I think probably there's a couple motivations here. They want to potentially have a faster, more potent effect, and they also want to financially benefit from it. But again, along with that comes the potential of much higher side effect risks. So they know resveratrol inhibits aromatase, so they wanted to study it. They wanted to create analogs to that maybe do it more strongly than natural resveratrol. 2019 study, here's one. Resveratrol as a tumor suppressive nutraceutical modulating tumor microenvironment and malignant behaviors of cancer. So specific to cancer, can resveratrol help? Let's check it out. They say here, quote, tumor suppressive effects of resveratrol have been shown in various types of cancer. Resveratrol can potentiate its tumor suppressive effect through modulation of the signaling pathways of the cellular components. So it's tumor suppressive by modulating the immune system. And then resveratrol can suppress malignant phenotypes of cancer cells acquired in response to stresses of tumor microenvironment, such as hypoxia, oxidative stress, and inflammation. So basically what that says is resveratrol can have a direct tumor suppressive effect by its impact on the immune system and the immune system response to tumor cells. Resveratrol can suppress cancer cells by changing the tumor microenvironment. What does that mean? Let's jump down to an image. It'll be easier for us. So here's a graphic from the study, and it's showing the tumor suppressive effects of resveratrol. So how do we promote cancer? We drive lots of inflammation. We drive lots of oxidative stress. We drive hypoxia, which is fancy for low oxygen, okay, which also will lead to more inflammation. So cancers love low oxygen environments. They love sugar. They love inflammation. Well, resveratrol, you can see when you add resveratrol to cancer, how it impacts the oxidative stress is in the green box. How it impacts hypoxia, blue box. How it impacts inflammation, orange box. Basically what they're saying is these stressful inputs will drive a cell to be cancerous, and resveratrol can stop that process or help modulate that process or reverse that process. And what I want you to take home is the conversation of the war on cancer, so to speak, is about killing it, right? What does typical cancer treatment do? They cut, poison, burn, right? They're going to surgically remove it. They're going to poison it with chemotherapy. They're going to burn it with radiation. And if that doesn't work, then sorry, we tried. But so they're addressing the tumor when it's there, but they're not asking about the microenvironment, and they're not having the patient change their lifestyle, and they're not paying tons of money to educate people on how to live so that cancer never develops, versus once you get cancer, well, now let's try, right? So this tumor microenvironment conversation is huge, because that is the part that lifestyle is very, very effective for. And if we want prevention, that's what we need to do, is we need to figure out, well, how can we live and how can we create an internal environment that is not conducive to cancer. And we've talked about that a lot, right? We want to be anti-inflammatory, we want to be oxygenated, we want to have the proper diet and not be over sugared, right? We want to have a proper pH that's net alkaline, because cancer loves an acidic environment. We want to have good circulation, healthy mind states, all these things that are applicable across chronic disease are applicable to cancer. And so if we want to really prevent it, it's not about getting a mammogram every year. It's about having the proper diet, getting the proper sleep, having appropriate stress levels and exercise, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought this was a great study and a great graphic to show, that they're looking at the tumor microenvironment as a place to target in cancer therapy, not just trying to cut, poison, burn. And then B, they're studying things that can be adjunctive to the chemotherapy and the radiation. So don't take this as resveratrol will cure your cancer. Take it as it's a great adjunct in your cancer care. So resveratrol and turmeric as well have been shown to be chemosensitizing and radiosensitizing, as well as chemoprotective. So what does that mean? Chemosensitizing. Resveratrol helps the chemotherapy more specifically hit the tumor or the cancer. It helps it be more effective and at killing it. Same for radiation. Chemoprotective is the resveratrol helps protect your healthy cells from the damages of chemotherapy, which, if we're making the chemotherapy more effective at killing the cancer and we can protect your healthy cells from the chemotherapy, then, that's helpful in protecting you from developing cancer from the chemo treatment, down the road, right? So if you know someone with cancer and who's going through cancer therapy or about to start, perhaps looking up these studies and printing them off for their oncologist and just having that conversation. Hey, do you think adjunctive therapy with resveratrol and or turmeric or cumin, can we consider this? Can we add this? Because the studies, the science is showing that it's helpful. So I wanted to bring this to our attention today because resveratrol is a very powerful NF-kappa B inhibitor. And if our goal is chronic disease prevention and an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, then resveratrol should be something that you're aware of and potentially is available in your healthy functional medicine cabinet to be used when needed. So let's open it up for questions. Or comments.
I like your when needed. So this isn't glutathione. So this wouldn't be one of those things that you're like, yeah, just take it all the time.
No, because again, if we go, let me get back to this. And all right. So remember, this is NF-kappa B. This whole loop here is normal physiology, right? So when I have an infection, I need to mount an inflammatory response so that I can clear it, so I don't stay chronically infected. And if I'm taking a strong NF-kappa B inhibitor every single day as kind of a wellness or preventative strategy, I may, collect chronic infections because I'm not allowing, I could potentially inhibit my immune capacity to respond to them. So we when there's clinical reason to use it, we have it available and we use it. And then if we're using labs to track it, then we know, okay, we're using it. So for example, say you had high C-reactive protein, okay? And we wanted to use NF-kappa B inhibition to drive your inflammation down. Well, we could take it, we have your CRP at baseline, we take the NF-kappa B inhibitors, so resveratrol in this case, and we could retest after a clinical trial, say 4 or 6 weeks. Okay, your CRP went from 6 to 1.5. Good, we got it where we want it. Let's drop the resveratrol right now. Okay. Yeah. And again, depending on the case context, there are cases where maybe you're an RA patient and you've got chronic joint pain, right? And so that might be a longer term strategy for you. But if you're just someone who likes health and you're reading about this and you buy everything Mercola emails you, it might not be a good thing to do.
Right. Okay. I mean, I know I took it because I was Th17 dominant, but we got that under control. So, yeah. So
now it's more like a functional medicine first aid kit kind of deal, right? Okay. So, you have some flare of some sort. Okay. So say you have an MS flare, right? Your vision gets a little wonky and you haven't changed anything, but you had an exposure, of a trigger that historically has inflamed you before, you could empirically take some resveratrol to get ahead of that flare, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I didn't say it in the presentation, but I'll show you because you guys are here putting the time in. So where is it? Oh, here we go. So there's studies that show, so curcumin or turmeric is another big time NF-kappa B inhibitor, and there's research showing that together they're synergistic. Okay, so instead of 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 1 = 3 or more, right? So naturally occurring compounds such as curcumin and resveratrol are potent agents for inflammation. Both compounds mediate their effects by targeting NF-kappa B. Treatment with curcumin or resveratrol suppressed NF-kappa B regulated gene products involved in inflammation. We propose that combining these natural compounds may be a useful strategy for osteoarthritis, or osteoarthritis is the normal, or not normal, but the arthritis most people are familiar with, the one that's not considered autoimmune. So we propose combining these is useful compared to doing one or the other individually. And there's other studies showing synergy. So, if you've got a flare and you've got them both in your first aid kit, then you want to knock it down extra quick, you take both unless there was a reason in your case that you wanted to avoid one or the other.
Thank you.
Is there a best source of resveratrol? Doesn't it come from grapes? And is it Japanese knotwood, or am I confusing that with something else?
It does come from grapes, the skins of grapes. So you want, grapes are not a thick-skinned food, right? So grapes would be one of the ones you'd like to get as organic as possible and not sprayed, because the skins will allow things through, and now you're delivering. I'm getting resveratrol, but you're probably burning it all to deal with the toxins that you ingested with it, right? So grapes would be the best, say, food source. Japanese knotwood has some. There's another one, I can't think of the Latin name right now. I can look it up for you. But are you going to eat enough grapes to get a therapeutic dose? Unlikely. So if you're talking about the inflammatory inhibition that we're talking about, like in the context of chronic disease, grapes likely aren't going to do it for you. So it'd be supplementing.
We've also talked about before that wine is not the best option for this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's always someone, see, I can drink my wine. It's like,
Yeah.
again,
Right.
you're with the wine, you're getting the potential histamines and sulfites and all that other stuff. Alcohol is alcohol, regardless of how it's packaged. So, no, you want to, unless you're trying to justify your addiction, you want an actual therapeutic dose, which if you do that with wine, you're getting therapeutic doses of other things too.
Right. I like when people tell me that, like, oh, well, that's a really great way to get that healthy R word. No,
Yeah.
it's not.
The Merlot is for medicinal purposes.
Right.
That's right. Oh, I wanted to show this slide and I forgot to. So here's one, just looking at the dietary input or diet contribution to cancer. This is the study it's from. So cancer is a preventable disease that requires major lifestyle changes. Okay, so talking about that tumor microenvironment conversation again. All right, and this is from 2008. So we've got a lot more information on this since then, but let's just take a minute to look at this. This year, more than 1 million Americans and more than 10 million people worldwide are expected to be diagnosed with cancer. All right, so just a disease commonly believed to be preventable. Bang, so just hear that sentence. We just went through 2 years of hell for something that didn't kill 10 million people worldwide. Okay, and that was 2008, 1 year, and it's every year, and it goes higher every year, right? But we're not hearing messaging like we've heard the last 2 years for something that doesn't prevent anything. Okay, only 5 to 10% of all cancer cases can be attributed to genetics. Okay, what do you hear? The war on cancer, we have to find the genes, right? Only 5 to 10% are genetics, whereas the remaining 90 to 95% have their roots in environment and lifestyle. Mic drop, right? Yeah. Lifestyle factors include cigarette smoking, diet, alcohol, sun exposure, environmental pollutants, infection, stress, obesity, physical inactivity. The evidence indicates that of all cancer-related deaths, 25 to 30% are due to tobacco, as many as 30 to 35% are diet, 15 to 20% infections, and the remaining percentages are due to other factors like radiation, stress, physical activity, environmental pollutants. Therefore, cancer prevention requires smoking cessation, increased fruits and vegetables, moderation of alcohol, caloric restriction, exercise, avoidance of direct exposure to sunlight, minimal meat consumption, which I don't agree with that necessarily. It depends on the type of meat. And I don't agree with the rest of the sentence, so I won't even read it. In this review, we present evidence that inflammation is the link between the agents or factors that cause cancer and the agents that prevent it. Boom, that lowest common denominator, right? In addition, we provide evidence that cancer is a preventable disease that requires major lifestyle changes. Again, that it's in the science, it's in the research, but in the hospital room, it's not discussed at all, right? Just like your statins and your cholesterol. The commercials say, if 6 weeks of intense dietary and lifestyle change doesn't happen, use the statin, but they always go straight to the statin, right? And so here's a graphic from this study, okay, showing you of the 35% diet-driven cancers, pancreatic cancer, boom, colorectal cancer. So there's a lot of dietary input in cancer because diet affects the tumor microenvironment.